August 25, 1944. Paris is free. Church bells ring across the City of Light as French citizens pour into the streets embracing American liberators. It's the moment the world has been waiting for, the symbolic victory that proves the Allies are winning. But 60 miles to the east, General George Patton isn't celebrating. His Third Army has just covered 400 miles in 1 month, shattering German resistance across France. His tanks are rolling toward the German border. His divisions are destroying enemy formations faster than intelligence can count them, and Patton can see the Rhine River within reach. Then the message arrives from General Omar Bradley. Halt operations, conserve fuel, consolidate positions. Patton reads it and makes a decision that will define his legacy. He's not stopping. His reply to Bradley is immediate and defiant. What Bradley said next would determine whether the war ended in 1944 or dragged on through a brutal winter. This is the story of the greatest logistical crisis of World War II and the clash between two generals over how to win it. The Third Army's breakout from Normandy in early August 1944 was unlike anything military theorists had predicted. While British Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery ground forward methodically against determined German resistance at Caen, and while Lieutenant General Courtney Hodges' First Army fought through the Norman hedgerows, Patton's Third Army exploded through the Avranches Gap like water through a broken dam. His 8 divisions attacked simultaneously in 4 directions: west into Brittany, south toward the Loire, east toward the Seine, and north to help trap German forces in the Falaise pocket. The speed of advance shattered conventional understanding of what armored formations could achieve. By August 14th, just 2 weeks after becoming operational, Third Army had advanced 150 miles and captured more than 25,000 prisoners. Patton's forces weren't just moving fast. They were destroying German units faster than enemy commanders could reorganize their defenses. Wehrmacht divisions that had held stubbornly against Montgomery's methodical attacks simply disintegrated when Patton struck them. What made this possible was Patton's philosophy of exploitation. He understood that in mobile warfare, momentum itself becomes a weapon. Every hour of delay allows the enemy to establish new defensive positions, bring up reserves, and reorganize shattered units. Patton refused to allow that consolidation. When his forward elements encountered resistance, he didn't halt to bring up his main force. He bypassed the strong point, left it for follow-on infantry to reduce, and kept his armor moving toward the next objective. German commanders found themselves fighting American forces in their rear before they had finished establishing defensive positions to their front. The technique required aggressive, competent subordinate commanders who understood Patton's intent and executed it without waiting for detailed orders. Major General Wade Hyslop, commanding 15th Corps, and Major General Walton Walker, commanding XX Corps, proved perfect for the role. They pushed their divisions relentlessly, accepting calculated risks that more cautious commanders would have avoided. When Hyslop's forces reached the Seine at Mantes on August 19th, they had covered nearly 300 miles in less than 3 weeks. But speed created problems that would eventually halt even Patton's momentum. Every mile of advance stretched supply lines longer and thinner. Third Army was consuming enormous quantities of fuel and ammunition. An armored division required 73,000 gallons of fuel just to move 100 miles.
Push on? Yeah. We flank right, avoid that sniper alley. Roger, moving out.
Patton had multiple armored divisions racing simultaneously in different directions. The logistics were staggering, and the infrastructure to support them simply did not exist. Everything still had to come through the beaches and ports of Normandy. The great port of Cherbourg had been captured in late June, but German demolitions had destroyed its facilities. Engineers worked around the clock to restore its capacity, but the work would take months. Until then, supplies came across the beaches through the artificial mulberry harbors, or were manhandled directly onto landing craft at low tide. From the beaches, everything moved by truck over roads that were never designed for such traffic. The solution was the Red Ball Express, a dedicated trucking operation that moved supplies forward to the advancing armies. At its peak, the Red Ball employed 6,000 trucks operated largely by African-American soldiers, driving around the clock on one-way routes that stretched hundreds of miles. They moved 12,000 tons of supplies daily, an impressive figure that still could not keep pace with Patton's consumption. The farther east his forces advanced, the longer the supply line stretched, and the more fuel was consumed just moving supplies forward. By mid-August, Patton's staff officers were warning that the Third Army was outrunning its logistics tail. Fuel consumption was exceeding delivery. Ammunition stocks were declining. Replacement parts for vehicles were in short supply. But Patton's response was always the same. Keep moving. Live off captured German supplies where possible. Worry about logistics later. He believed that stopping to build up supplies would give the Germans time to establish new defensive lines. Better to keep pressure on a retreating enemy, even if it meant taking calculated risks with logistics. Paris fell on August 25th to forces under French General Philippe Leclerc, but it was Patton's breakthrough that made the liberation possible. The psychological impact was immense. The liberation of Paris proved the Allies were winning, boosted French morale, and validated the sacrifices of D-Day. But militarily, Paris created new problems. The city required immediate supply of food and fuel for its civilian population, further straining Allied logistics. And now, with Paris secure, political and military leaders began asking the obvious question: should the advance pause to consolidate before pushing into Germany itself? On August 31st, 1944, Patton's Third Army reached the Meuse River near Verdun and Commercy, just 30 miles from the Moselle River and the German border beyond. His 13th Corps crossed the Meuse before German forces could demolish the bridges, seizing a crucial advantage that should have allowed continued rapid advance. Patton could see the Siegfried Line fortifications in the distance. With adequate fuel, his forces could breach those defenses before the Germans could fully man them. The opportunity was extraordinary, but the reality was devastating. Third Army was running out of gas. The numbers told a brutal story. On that single day, August 31st, Third Army received just 32,000 gallons of fuel, barely enough to move one armored division 25 miles. Patton had requested 400,000 gallons, the amount he calculated would allow him to reach the German frontier and breach the Siegfried Line before enemy defenses could be organized. The shortfall was not 1/18th of what he needed, as some accounts later stated, but effectively nothing for an army that had been consuming hundreds of thousands of gallons daily during the advance across France. Patton's response was characteristic. He called Bradley's headquarters demanding fuel with the urgency of a man who could see victory slipping away. According to those who heard the conversation, Patton told Bradley that his men could eat their belts, but his tanks had to have gas. He argued that every day of delay allowed the Germans to strengthen their defenses. That momentum was the Third Army's greatest weapon, and that halting now would cost American lives later when those same German divisions had to be fought again from prepared positions. Bradley's position was more complicated than Patton acknowledged. As commander of the 12th Army Group, Bradley controlled not just Third Army, but also Hodge's First Army to the north. Both armies were competing for the same limited supplies moving forward from Normandy. Supreme Commander Dwight Eisenhower had made a strategic decision that would define the remainder of 1944. He favored a broad front approach rather than concentrating all resources behind a single thrust. This meant both American armies and Montgomery's British-Canadian forces would advance together rather than one army getting priority, while others remained static. The decision reflected both military and political considerations. Militarily, Eisenhower worried that a narrow thrust deep into Germany would create vulnerable flanks, that German forces could counterattack. He had watched the German Ardennes offensive in May 1940 nearly be cut off by French counterattacks from the flanks, and he did not want to repeat that risk. Politically, Eisenhower had to manage an alliance between American, British, and Canadian forces. Giving all supplies to Patton would have meant halting Montgomery's advance, which would have created diplomatic problems with the British government and military leadership. But the immediate reality was simpler. There was not enough fuel to support everyone's advance simultaneously. A choice had to be made about who received priority for the available supplies. That choice was being made at Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, and the answer was devastating for Patton. Montgomery's 21st Army Group received priority for Operation Market Garden, the ambitious plan to capture bridges across the Rhine in Holland and provide a northern route into Germany. Hodges' First Army received sufficient fuel to maintain pressure toward Aachen and the Siegfried Line in the north. Third Army would have to make do with what remained. Bradley delivered this news to Patton in language that was sympathetic but final. He understood Patton's frustration, agreed that Third Army had the opportunity to continue a successful advance, but explained that the decision came from Eisenhower and reflected strategic priorities that were beyond Bradley's authority to change. The conversation, reconstructed from post-war accounts and Patton's diary entries, revealed the fundamental tension in the Allied command structure. Brilliant tactical opportunities had to be balanced against strategic coordination and political realities. Patton's diary entries from this period reveal his fury. He wrote that the decision to halt Third Army while giving priority to Montgomery was criminal. He believed Montgomery was slow, cautious, and unlikely to achieve significant results with the resources being allocated to him. Patton calculated that his own forces were positioned to breach the Siegfried Line and cross the Rhine within days if given adequate fuel. He saw the opportunity being wasted for political reasons rather than military necessity. But Patton also faced a reality that he was less willing to acknowledge. His supply lines were genuinely overextended. Even if he had received the fuel he requested, maintaining an advance deep into Germany would have required a functioning logistics system that simply did not exist yet. The port facilities in Brittany that Third Army had been supposed to capture remained under German control, requiring longer sieges than anticipated. The Red Ball Express was operating at maximum capacity and could not be expanded significantly without vehicles being taken from combat units. Patton's response to Bradley's halt order revealed the complexity of their long professional relationship. They had served together for decades, respected one another, and understood each other's strengths and flaws. In late August and early September 1944, that relationship faced its most severe test. Patton did not openly defy Bradley's orders, which would have meant relief from command. Instead, he practiced what historians later termed creative compliance. When ordered to consolidate and halt offensive operations, Patton interpreted the directive as aggressively as possible. Consolidation, in his view, meant securing flanks and establishing river bridgeheads, tasks that required continued movement. Operations that others might label offensive, he reclassified as reconnaissance in force, allowing Third Army to keep pressing forward. The pace slowed, but the advance never fully stopped. Patton also relied on his rock soup method, a tactic he had used before when higher headquarters tried to restrain him. He would seek approval for limited actions and then expand them incrementally. A patrol became a company a battalion, until a bridgehead existed that demanded reinforcement. By the time higher command reacted, the situation on the ground often justified continuing the operation. Bradley was fully aware of what Patton was doing. Accounts from staff officers and post-war memoirs show Bradley attempting to balance encouragement of Patton's aggressiveness with the reality of limited supplies and Eisenhower's strategic guidance. He allowed Patton to exploit opportunities, but made clear that major supply allocations would not support sustained offensives. It was freedom to act, within constraints. The most significant example came at the Moselle River in early September. While Bradley's orders called for holding the West Bank, Patton ordered immediate assault crossings near Nancy and elsewhere. He argued German defenses were weak and that delaying would forfeit the opportunity. Once bridgeheads were established, Bradley chose not to reverse them. Instead, he reinforced success with engineers and limited fuel, his characteristic approach to managing Patton. These gains came at a cost. German forces, strengthened during the fuel pause, counterattacked aggressively. Metz became an unavoidable obstacle, and the newly formed 106th Panzer Brigade struck Third Army's flank at Ericourt, forcing hard fighting and consuming scarce resources. Patton believed constant pressure was preferable to giving the enemy time to recover. Bradley agreed in principle, but had to balance this view against Allied logistics and broader strategic demands. The result was an uneasy compromise. Third Army kept fighting, but at reduced tempo. Bridgeheads held, limited offensives continued, yet the sweeping advances of August were over. Not because Patton lacked will, but because logistics could no longer sustain it. By mid-September 1944, Third Army was no longer fighting the fast-moving war that had defined August. Operations shifted to the Lorraine region of northeastern France, terrain long suited for defense. German forces, granted time to regroup by the Allied fuel crisis, established strong positions centered on the fortified cities of Metz and Nancy. What Patton expected to be a brief pause before resuming the drive into Germany instead became a costly campaign of attrition lasting into November. Metz symbolized the problem. Its 43 reinforced concrete forts, modernized after German annexation in 1870, formed a mutually supporting defensive network designed to withstand siege. German Commander General Otto von Knobelsdorff recognized Metz's importance and ordered it held at all costs. Unlike earlier strongpoints, Metz could not be bypassed. Its control of Moselle River crossings and surrounding roads meant leaving it intact would threaten American supply lines. The fortress had to be reduced, forcing Patton into the type of warfare he disliked most. The Lorraine fighting exposed both Patton's strengths and his limits. His instinct for speed and pressure had been ideal for exploitation, but deliberate attacks against prepared defenses required patience, coordination, and acceptance of slow progress. These were not his natural inclinations. The assault on Fort Driant illustrated this mismatch. Ordered seized in September, the fort's underground defenses trapped American troops in brutal close combat. After heavy casualties and little progress, Patton ordered a withdrawal, one of the rare times he did so. Fort Driant would fall only in November as part of Metz's final surrender. Omar Bradley observed the campaign with mixed feelings. He admired Patton's determination, but worried that Lorraine was consuming men and supplies without producing decisive results. Some at 12th Army Group questioned 3rd Army's employment. Bradley defended Patton publicly, but privately pressed for objectives better aligned with available resources. Tensions between Bradley and Patton grew. Patton insisted sufficient supplies would allow a breakthrough and renewed advance toward the Rhine. Bradley argued Eisenhower's broad front strategy required balanced pressure, not concentration behind one thrust. The debate could not be resolved at their level. Gradually, logistics improved. Cherbourg increased capacity. Marseille began sending supplies north, and the Red Ball Express continued operations. By October, 3rd Army had enough fuel and ammunition for sustained offensives, though not the rapid exploitation Patton desired. Despite frustration, 3rd Army adapted. Units learned deliberate assault tactics, engineers refined methods for reducing fortifications, and infantry improved coordination with armor and artillery. The army that emerged from Lorraine was more capable and resilient, though Patton never fully valued the lessons paid for so dearly. The debate over supply priorities and operational tempo that had defined the autumn of 1944 was resolved not by Bradley or Patton, but by Adolf Hitler. On December 16th, 3 German armies smashed through weak American positions in the Ardennes forest, launching the offensive that would become known as the Battle of the Bulge. The surprise attack created exactly the kind of crisis that revealed both Patton's genius and the wisdom of Bradley's patient management of his most aggressive subordinate. The Battle of the Bulge vindicated everything Patton had argued about the value of aggressive offensive action and validated everything Bradley had argued about the need for realistic operational planning that matched means to ends. When Eisenhower convened his emergency conference at Verdun on December 19th, both approaches would be tested against desperate circumstances. Patton's performance during that conference has become legendary. While other commanders discussed the crisis in somber tones, Patton exuded confidence. When Eisenhower tried to maintain optimism by calling the German offensive an opportunity rather than disaster, Patton embraced that perspective genuinely rather than as empty cheerleading. He had been reading intelligence reports since early November, suggesting a German buildup opposite the Ardennes sector, and had ordered his staff to prepare contingency plans for pivoting 3rd Army north if needed. The critical moment came when Eisenhower asked Patton how quickly he could disengage from operations in Lorraine, turn 90 degrees north, and attack into the southern flank of the German penetration. Patton's answer shocked everyone present. "As soon as you're through with me, I can attack the day after tomorrow morning." Most commanders in the room thought it impossible. Turning an entire army perpendicular to its lines of communication and attacking in a new direction would normally require weeks of planning and preparation. Patton was promising to do it in 48 hours, but Patton had prepared for exactly this contingency. His staff had worked out detailed plans for moving 3rd Army north. Units had been alerted to be ready for rapid movement. Supply dumps had been positioned to support operations in multiple directions. When Patton left the Verdun conference, he called his headquarters with a 2-word code phrase, "play ball," that initiated pre-planned orders setting the entire 3rd Army in motion. What followed was one of the most remarkable military movements in American history. Within 72 hours, Patton disengaged 6 divisions from combat in Lorraine, moved them more than 100 miles north in winter conditions, and launched coordinated attacks into the southern flank of the German Bulge. More than 130,000 vehicles were rerouted, 62,000 tons of supplies were moved, and the entire operation was executed with minimal confusion. On December 26th, lead elements of the 4th Armored Division broke through German lines and relieved the surrounded defenders at Bastogne. Bradley watched this performance with satisfaction and vindication of his own. He had protected Patton through multiple controversies, defended him against critics who thought him too reckless, and given him latitude to employ his aggressive instincts when circumstances permitted. The relief of Bastogne demonstrated that Bradley's patient management had preserved Patton's capability to deliver exactly the kind of aggressive action that the crisis demanded. The conversations between Bradley and Patton during and after the Battle of the Bulge revealed a relationship that had matured through 18 months of combat operations together. Bradley trusted Patton to execute complex operations without detailed supervision. Patton accepted Bradley's authority to set strategic priorities and allocate resources. Both generals understood that their partnership, despite frequent disagreements over tactics and tempo, had been essential to Allied success. What Bradley said when Patton refused to stop after Paris was not a single dramatic quote, but a series of practical conversations about balancing operational opportunity against logistical reality. Bradley supported Patton's aggressive instincts when circumstances permitted, restrained him when necessary, and never allowed their tactical disagreements to damage their professional relationship. This management approach allowed Patton's battlefield genius to be employed effectively while preventing his aggressive nature from creating disasters that his brilliance could not overcome. The fuel crisis that halted Third Army after Paris prevented Patton from achieving the dramatic victory he believed possible in September 1944, but it also preserved his forces for the operations that would follow, including the relief of Bastogne, the drive across the Rhine in March 1945, and the final campaign into southern Germany and Czechoslovakia. History would debate whether the war could have ended in 1944 if Patton had received the fuel he demanded. What is not debatable is that Bradley's careful management of his most talented and difficult subordinate was essential to Allied victory, and that their partnership exemplified the complex relationship between tactical brilliance and strategic necessity that defines successful military command at the highest levels.